Dan, when did you become interested in aviation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I grew up in a rather poor family, and so there wasn't a whole lot of opportunities there that for my future. But in about the ninth grade, I saw an Air Force commercial back in the day when we had like three television stations, and you had to move the rabbit ears around to get the picture just right. They would go off the air around 11 p.m. and it would go to a test pattern. Sometimes they would end with maybe the American flag waving in the breeze with the Star Spangled Banner. But on this particular night, it was an F-104 starfighter taking off, looked like maybe out of Edwards Air Force Base, had a chase plane flying with it, filming it. And as it climbed up out of there, I'm sure you're familiar with the John Gillespie Magee Jr. High Flight poem, and a deep voiced narrator was narrating the High Flight poem with some beautiful music as the F-104 is climbing out and going through some swirly clouds, and so it ended up with the F-104 pitching up into a high vertical climb up and away from the photo chase as they followed him with the camera. On the very last part of the poem, where it says, "Put out my hand and touch the face of God," as the F-104 just went up into the blackness. And it inspired me to the point that I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be a fighter pilot. Later, I studied about Chuck Yeager and figured out, hey, actually want to be a test pilot because I like math and science. So that was my goal. Everybody laughed at me and called me names. They said, "You'll never do that." But anyway, I was very fortunate. I applied for an Air Force ROTC scholarship to become a pilot, and I guess I did okay on the qualification test and the aptitude. So I got a full ride scholarship to anywhere I want to go, and I chose Georgia Tech to become an aerospace engineer. And the rest is kind of history. That worked out, and I got commissioned, and then went off to pilot training. I had about a year delay from graduation before I actually got orders to pilot training. It was the wind down of the Vietnam War, and I graduated from Georgia Tech in 1977, and I didn't start pilot training until about April of '78.
Awesome stuff. So, after your pilot training, did you know what aircraft or frontline aircraft you wanted to go on to?
Well, you don't really get a chance to select an aircraft specifically. I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot, so I was hoping for that, and I did qualify for the fighter slot. We actually got our assignments very late in the year, and it turns out that year they were in great need of F-111 pilots, and our fighter block was six F-111s. And that was kind of unusual, not expected by any of us. We thought maybe F-4, F-15, something like that, but we did have one F-15, and it went to a guy that was a prior Wizzo that had a lot of flying experience and now qualified as a pilot. So I was kind of excited about it because I studied up on it and realized, oh, yeah, that aircraft has a lot of firsts. The first variable swing aircraft that was in production was McNamara's attempt, the TFX program it was called. He wanted to have an airplane that would be both dual use Navy and Air Force. The F-111B model was the Air Force, the Navy designated model. It did not meet the wind over deck qualifications for carrier landings. So they kind of branched off, and that model went away, and we had the A, the C for Australia, the D, and the E and the F, those models. And I've flown all of them but the C and the F. I flew the A, the D, and the E. Most of my time was in the E.
So, can you talk us through some of your ground and flying training on the F-111? And was it a difficult aircraft to kind of learn?
Yeah, so the F-111 was considered extremely difficult to learn. In fact, before they had to make this drastic change to take second lieutenants out of pilot training and put them in the airplane, you had to have before that you had to have at least 1,000 hours in some other fighter, like an F-105, F-4, something that was another fighter, and then you went to the right seat of the 111 and you became a co-pilot and you ran the radar and stuff. And then after a year or so, you might be eligible to upgrade to the left seat and become the aircraft commander. But in this case, all six of us were going straight to the left seat. And there were some P-Wizzos, as they called the right-seaters, pilot Wizzos, pilot weapons systems officers. And the P-Wizzos had not all been upgraded to aircraft commander when I arrived at my unit. And so some of them were very upset because they far outranked me and I was going straight in as aircraft commander. So they kind of had to resolve that pretty quickly simultaneous to this. I think the thinking was because it was the first automatic terrain following radar aircraft, the first variable swing wing, which was all manual controlled, as opposed to the Tomcat, which was the follow-up for the Navy, the next swing wing airplane. And that one that had a lot of automation in the wing control, so it would look at angle of attack and speed, and it would set the wings for you to be optimum. You could manually override that. But on the 111, everything was manual control. The E-squared scope that we looked at for terrain following radar was quite a bit of a challenge to interpret because it wasn't a linear line. It was this sort of S-shape, or maybe not S-shape, but it made a curve, and you had to watch for the radar returns coming in to that curve to make sure that the curve was representing where your aircraft's going to be, and you want to make sure that you would clear obstacles. So my first time trying to fly night automatic terrain following radar was quite interesting because when it's in automatic terrain following radar, the control augmentation system is flying the aircraft, but the stick's not moving. So you have a stick that's just still there, and you stand by and guard it in case you need to take control, but the airplane's doing everything for you. It was a smooth ride. It's very high wing loading, so down low level you didn't feel bumps at all. You could go through mountain wave turbulence and barely feel a jiggle that in turbulence that would probably take the wings off of a Cessna. So it was, they referred to it as the Cadillac because it was built for long range and very high speed. It was super smooth, supersonic. It was Mach 2.5 at altitude, and I've been there a few times. But mainly it was the fact that it could do a 1.2 Mach on the deck, 800 knots calibrated, which is about 959 miles per hour at treetop height. And that was a thrilling thing. So yeah, it was about a 7-month conversion course. Went through Mountain Home Air Force Base in the F-111A, and then got my follow-on assignment, which was to RAF Upper Heyford in the UK. And I got to spend 4.5 years there flying as part of NATO and flying with the RAF and doing a lot of coordination type stuff throughout NATO. So I flew all over Europe and Scandinavia. We went to Norway sometimes, Denmark. We literally had the entirety of Europe kind of as our backyard to play in. We also would deploy to Incirlik, Turkey during the wintertime when the weather was really bad in the UK and be able to do some dive bomb training in Turkey.
That's brilliant. Yeah, so let's talk about your time in the UK. Did it feel like a big shock, or flying-wise and cultural-wise, coming from the US for yourself?
Yeah, it was. It was very, very different culturally. I would say that in the Cotswolds, it was very much centered around pub life, and it's a lot of farms, and it's a beautiful country, and the people there were extremely friendly. It was during the days of Margaret Thatcher as the Prime Minister, Ronald Reagan as the President of the United States. They had a great relationship, and I had been welcomed into that community with open arms, and like the local publican, he recognized me coming in the door. He would grab my mug and pour me a draft of bitters, and so it was very interesting. I lived in a house that was over 450 years old, built out of stone. It was on an old Roman road, and it was a historic. It was called Howell's Barn Farm, and it had huge barn with big double doors on both sides. And when it was first built, it was built as a coach inn, and people who were traveling, the barn doors were big enough that the entire carriage and the horses could come into the barn, and they could unhitch and then go in and sleep in one of the bedrooms there. It was multiple bedrooms, 2 stories, slate roof, no insulation, very brisk in the wintertime. When it was snowy and cold in the UK, it was all we could do to keep warm in there. But we had a couple of the 5 fireplaces still worked. Many of them had been blocked off just due to age. And you had to be recommended by another 79th Fighter Squadron, which was
Okay.
called Tactical Fighter Squadron. Whoever lived in it had to recommend you, and it was always somebody out of 79th Tactical Fighter Squadron that got to live in the house, and I got recommended, so I moved in there, and it really emphasized the quaint changes of being in a house with leaded glass windows, with not very much insulation anywhere. In the wintertime, I remember the window at the head of the bed would just get totally glazed over with ice on the inside.
Wow.
And we slept with both an American electric blanket, which goes on top,
Yeah.
and a British one that goes under you and helps keep the mattress dry, and then multiple layers of blankets above that. So waking up in the morning in the wintertime with my breath forming dewdrops on the top of the top cover was a unique experience. But I loved it. I was freezing to death when I first got there because I had gone through pilot training in Phoenix and kind of
Yes.
adapted to the Southwest. And yeah, when I first got there, I got in December of '79, and I thought I was going to freeze to death before my blood got thick enough to handle it.
Yeah. So let's talk about the flying over there. Obviously, you mentioned Europe there. What was it like working with the European nations and obviously the RAF? And did you enjoy that?
I really did. There was a camaraderie there that was very, very deep. At least in those days, it was. If we ever had to divert, we often were landing at a base with the RAF. For instance, one time I had engine fire. I had to shut it down and do an emergency landing, and I went into RAF Benbrook on the East Coast,
The
and
Lightnings.
that was a home of the Lightnings, yeah, the over and under, and it was a great experience. They made me feel very welcome. I didn't get to fly a Lightning, but I did get to sit in the cockpit of one and see the articulated stick and get a sense of what it was like to fly that. But we were serving. Often we were called on to do night missions at 1.6 Mach, cruising supersonic in the North Sea, coming by, not going over the land, obviously, keeping our sonic boom out to sea. We would be at medium altitude, 16 to 20,000 feet, and the Lightnings would scramble and try to
Wow.
do a supersonic intercept, which is very challenging. You get one
Mm.
shot at it, and so after they would make their turn and try to get into a shooting position, of course they're out of fuel at that point. They're just headed home. So I had flown with them in that capacity, but that was my first chance when I had this emergency landing to spend a few days with them. And for the American pilots over there, we were very respectful of all the international rules, whether we're in flying in the UK or flying in Germany or France or wherever. We didn't fly below the low altitude minimums. We stayed on the routes. And if we got a noise complaint, we took aggressive action to correct, the behavior of
Mm.
whoever caused that. So I'm standing at the ops desk, and the supervisor of flying that day, he gets a call and says, "Bring, bring, 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 hello," and it was apparently a noise complaint that's being called in, and he goes, "Oh, I see, flying low. Did you happen to see the tail?" "Yes. Can I ask you a question? Did the tail of the aircraft have a sickle and a hammer on it?" "No, it didn't." "Oh, thank God, it was one of ours." And so I laughed so hard. I said, "That never
Brilliant.
goes that way at the command post at RAF Upper Heyford." And he said, "Well, these chaps have got to get a grip. We're out there training, and occasionally it's going to get a little loud."
Yeah,
But yeah,
absolutely.
I really loved. One time I had to divert into Lossiemouth up in Scotland,
Mm.
and the aircraft had a serious problem there that was going to take, shipping and parts and an engine. And so I was there for many days, and of course, I didn't have proper clothing. And when they would go to the mess hall and have their dinner, everybody's in a coat and tie,
Mhm.
and I'm in my flight suit. But they welcomed me just as well, and we had a jolly old time. We sang songs and drank beers, and they treated me like I was one of their brothers. So every experience I had, including we would go to, since we were a tiger squadron, we
Yeah.
would go to tiger meets. And one time I got a chance to go to a tiger meet in Germany, and it was at the a base that was actually being occupied by Canadians, and they were flying F-104s out of this
Mm.
base. And it was in Baden-Baden, Germany. And they had the most incredible welcoming ceremony. And I'm taxiing into snow and like ice fog. And I don't even have the engine shut down yet. And there are a couple of chaps standing out by the airplane. And they had me open the canopy, and they're tossing bottled beers up in the cockpit. I go, let me get the engine shut down. So, yeah, it was a very wild time. We did a lot of carrier landings. We used the sofa cushions, leather black sofa cushions, and we used that as our landing gear. And there was an atrium in the middle of their officers' club that was, glass ceiling, and it had about 4 steps down, and it was glazed brick tiles. And they had taken hand pump fire extinguishers and laid down, like an inch or so of water. And your cushion, when you came running in and leaped off, your cushion would hit kind of be your landing gear. You'd just hydroplane on that cushion, and then you put your toes down, and they had a long tablecloth as coiled up like the cable, and you had to catch it with your feet or you go head first into the opposite wall. So we're doing a lot of that after playing some crud on snooker tables. And I told my Wizzo, I said, come on, we're going to do something unique. We're going to go off formation landing. So we did our first formation landing just side by side, and that worked great. So I guess a couple of years later, I said, hey, let's try doing an aileron roll opposite direction and, come down on our bellies. Well, that didn't work out so good. I didn't make full 360. I made about a 270, but I was able to pop down on my cushion, and I'm skidding toward the cable. But my Wizzo, he landed upside down with his cushion on top of him and slid into the runway markers, which were these little tea lights, the candles going down the sides. And his hair caught on fire. And so then they're leaving, clanging this bell. The guy comes in with a hand extinguisher and says, fire on the deck, fire on the deck. And they get the fire out on his head, and then they take the cable and they uncoil it, and they lay him on it and carry him out as like a makeshift stretcher. Another team comes in with another coiled tablecloth to make another cable, and they get the T lights all lined up again, and it said, the deck is clear. Continue recovering the fleet. The RCR is 12. It was just a blast, and you get to know all the different Tiger units throughout NATO, and including, even though Sweden was an independent country, their Tiger unit would come down to these meets, so you get to meet some pilots even of Sweden. And it was quite the camaraderie. I will never forget all my experiences in the UK, not only the great flying and the amazing thing to go low level in a 111 down the Rhine River looking at castles and
Oh yeah, I
beautiful,
can imagine.
man, just incredible. Great experience.
Absolutely. So before we move on to your test pilot time, yeah, can you tell us the story behind your call sign?
Yeah, okay. So in the late 79, 80 timeframe, I think there was a TV show going in America starring Robert Urich was the actor, and the show was called Vegas. That was the name of it, Vegas. And it was a private eye who drove a red Thunderbird with white leather interior, and his screen name was Dan Tana. Well, my actual first name is Dan, not Daniel, not a contraction for anything.
Mhm.
Just Dan, named after my mother's horse. I was probably like 35 years old before I figured out which end of the horse I was probably named after. But I had my first marriage was in Las Vegas. Big mistake. Um, but at any rate, because of that, and because I had a red Corvette with a white leather interior, and my first name was Dan, somehow during a poker game, one of the guys came up with, "Your tactical call sign's Tana. We're going to call you Dan Tana." And it stuck. And from that point on, throughout my whole career, I was known as Tana or Dan Tana. In fact, most of my pilot friends probably don't remember my real last name. They just know me as Tana. So
Yeah.
there's a real camaraderie that goes with those tactical names. And, you can get a really goofy one that you're stuck with if you do something goofy. But all in all, that one wasn't a bad one. And of course, when it was given, everybody knew that TV show. So that wasn't a bad thing.
So then you went on to be a test pilot. Can you talk us through this, Dan? And do you have to apply, or does someone come to you?
No, you definitely have to. You have to put out an application. Um, I did so very early in my career, knowing that I wasn't qualified yet because you had to have, I don't know, 1,500 hours in fighters, and
Mhm.
you had to have multiple airplanes in your background, multiple types already, and all I had flown at this point was the F-111. As far as an actual coded combat aircraft, and I didn't have 1,000 hours yet. But I'd done a lot of engineering things on my side while I was a pilot. Like, well, for instance, I got the first ever computer that you could buy. It was called an Atari 800. BASIC was the only programming language. And I decided, we spend 4.5 hours every mission doing flight planning, manually,
Mhm.
with the whiz wheel and figuring everything out. And you have to go in the back of the flight manual and look at all those uh, curvy lines and do interpolation. And you fill out your flight card, the Form 691 for United States Air Forces Europe. And then you fly with that on your kneeboard. But everything's done manually. It took 4.5 hours. So we came in 4.5 hours before takeoff on every sortie, no matter what time of the day or night our missions were. And because we were a night capable aircraft, we actually rotated and did like one week you'd be on morning shifts, the next week on late afternoons, and then the next week you'd be in the middle of the night kind of flying. And I thought, it'd be better if we could do this quicker. So I decided to create a flight planning software that would automate this process. It wasn't an easy task. I got kind of, I guess I got kind of totally enamored by getting it done. And I took a Friday and a Monday off and worked for 4 days in a row without sleep and finished it, and then started checking it against my manual flight planning and looking at the fuel flows in the airplanes and what it was calculating. And I finally figured out that, yeah, it's working good. It's very accurate. So I took it into the squadron commander. I said, hey, I'd like to lead this here and let people try to use it. It's very graphically intuitive. You're just, putting in the parameters on a 691 on the screen, and then it's going to print out after all the calculations. And so I had gone in and done all kinds of complex math called Chebyshev polynomials to figure out how to take those curvy lines for computing drag index out of the flight manual and digitize them so that you could
Wow.
just pick on a menu what your weapons loadout today, and it would compute your drag index and fuel flows and so forth based on that. And he agreed that, yeah, we could do that. But, here I am, let's see, was I a first lieutenant yet? Maybe not. I was just a second lieutenant. And there was a lot of doubts about whether a guy right out of pilot training could handle this airplane. And so I was always having a lot of pressure from the lieutenant colonels and the majors that had, 100 missions in Vietnam patches
Yeah.
on through the 105 or something. So I was always having to kind of prove myself. And those guys are focused as stogie cigars as their flight plan, and they don't want to do anything. They don't want anything to do with it. But some of the younger WIZOs, weapon systems officers coming right out of nav school, maybe had been exposed a little bit to a mainframe computer or something, and they decided to try it out. And literally, they came away going, "Look, 45 minutes and I'm done." Well, It was a game changer. And then all of a sudden, I couldn't get my computer back, so I had to talk to the squadron commander and the wing commander to see if our contracting folks could purchase some computers similar to this. I think TRS-80 was out by that point, and it was something that could be purchased. And I programmed them all, and then all the squadrons had a computerized flight planning. And that led to other things. I came up with a computerized way to distribute the fragmentary order of battle. So it would come out in the command post, and typically they just ripped off part of it, and they gave it to a sergeant to go get in a pickup truck and drive around the base to deliver each unit their fragmentary order of battle.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, well, in combat, if we were actually under attack, what's the likelihood that pickup truck's going to make it to the squadrons to give them their targets? Probably not real good, or especially if it's chemical warfare. So I decided, well, we had these phones inside of our hardened bunkers that we were in when we were practicing for war. And they only connected to the command post and the other squadrons. And the lines were all contained under the base, not hooked up to any network. And we could talk classified across those lines because it was secure. So I thought, well, why not have a way, because the device called a modulator demodulator or modem had just come out where you could couple a phone into a modem
Mm-hmm.
and turn analog signals into digital and then back into analog. So I bought some modems off the British market and experimented with it and figured out a way that we could have some really nice printers and computer screen, and the fragmentary order of battle could be delivered wirelessly over those telephone systems. You'd call up the squadron first, say, I've got your frag, let's hook up to the modems, and they'd both plug in their telephones, and then the beeps and squeak would start. And next thing you know, this thing's printing it out right there in the squadron. Nobody had to drive around the base. So that got to be very popular with the wing commander because it streamlined and made things safer. And then I noticed that we had a new radio, not the original alternating current 400 cycle radio that was in the airplane originally. They had since replaced it and updated with a very small DC powered radio. It was a 24 volt DC radio. And that radio had half quick, so we could, scramble our voice and step around on frequencies so that it wasn't easy to intercept the radio calls. But unfortunately, when they put that in, they actually just put in a transformer rectifier circuit to take the AC power that had been delivered in the old radio and turn it into DC. And yet we had huge battery that could power the thing for like 23 hours straight if we needed to be on DC power. But when we got in the airplane, we were literally forced to start one engine while we're waiting on our go call from the command post when we're practicing wartime procedures. And we're sitting there with one engine running for half hour to sometimes 45 minutes before we got the message. And we're doing that only to have the radio on. And of course, we had to have the intercom wasn't connected to the battery switch either. The battery switch was just simply going to do, emergency engine starts in the air. And so I thought, well, I think I can figure out a way to just go straight in from DC power into the radio. And I asked the wing commander, hey, could I have access to one of the hangar queens, the airplanes that have got so many parts and issues that they're not going to be flying for a while? And he said, okay. And I told him what I was going to try to do. And I wired up an airplane and fully tested it, and it worked so well that when that airplane went flying, we kept that in there. And we put a note in the front of the 781, which the aircraft maintenance forms, that let people know, hey, you got an aircraft that you just turn on the battery, now you got intercom and radio, and you can set your half quick, and you don't have to start the engine to monitor a command post. And so they said, you ought to submit this under the suggestion program, because they will pay you like 10% of whatever the savings was. And I calculated the savings. If all the F-111s had this, it'd be millions of dollars saved on fuel alone. So I submitted a package, and I figured out how to do it for every model of the 111, the A, the D, the E, and the F. And I submitted it to Sacramento, McClellan Air Force Base, where the depot was for them. And the engineers turned it down and said it's technically impossible to do. And so it was denied. But our wing commander had a chance when our four-star general, the commander of United States Air Forces Europe, and of course they're out of Bitburg, where the headquarters was, and he came up to visit our unit, and my wing commander showcased the command and control information system, the computerized flight planning, and then went out to the hangar and had me meet with the general and sit in the right seat while he was in the left seat so he could experience this radio mod. And he said, I want this in every F-111 in Europe. So that would be RAF Lake and Heath with the F-111Fs and the F-111Es at Heyford. And I looked at him and said, well, sir, I submitted the application for it, but they said it was technically impossible. And he had a few choice cuss words and said, I don't care. And he said, I want this in every F-111, and you're grounded until you get it done. I want you to go and modify every airplane here at Heyford and over at Lake and Heath.
Wow.
Well, I looked at my wing commander. I said, well, you're going to have to give me a certified electrician, enlisted guy, to go with me because I'm not technically legal to do this on all these airplanes. So I want somebody that can do it and have it signed off properly. I'll manufacture all the boxes. I'll do all the engineering, and I'll get it done. And so we did. We went over to Lake and Heath, and we wired up every airplane there. We did every airplane at Heyford. They did let me take a flight every 45 days just to not lose landing currency and start all over again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I literally did that. And fortunately for me, all of that engineering that I did that wasn't part of my job was recorded in my officer performance reports.